welcome to another slightly belated wrap up, this time for quarter 3. So everything I read from July to September. We don't have that many books to talk about this time. Thank God for that, because I was not reading a lot in these months, okay? Had a lot going on. We were finishing a thesis, we were moving to a new city, okay? Also, because a big chunk of the books that I did actually read during that time was for another video I did where once again, Emma chose a bunch of romance books for me to read, and it was a time, as it always is when reading romance, okay? A roller coaster that I love. The first book I want to talk about is Sisters of the Neversea by Cynthia Leitich-Smith, which is a fantastic retelling of Peter Pan, but with a specific focus on revealing the settler colonialism that's inherent to that story, as well as the island of Neverland itself. So in this iteration of the story, Lily is actually one of the key children that gets whisked away. She is from the Muskogee Nation, and her mother remarries a white Englishman, and that's how she acquires Wendy as her stepsister. We have a very blended family situation. Lily and Wendy have become inseparably close, but then their parents decide to split up, and so they have to decide what they're gonna do, where they're gonna stay, what home is for both of them. And then in the midst of this, Peter Pan shows up and just ruins everything. This was truly such a good middle grade moment. So glad a retelling of this story exists. Then we have Love is a Revolution by Renee Watson. This is a young adult book, which I very much enjoyed. We have Nala, who lives with her aunt and her uncle, her cousin, who's like a sister to her, Amani, and they are in high school, okay? Treacherous times. Amani is very into activism. It's not really Nala's scene. She cares, but she'd rather be watching reality TV, you know what I'm saying? However, she agrees to go to an event and she meets Ty, who's a very dreamy activist boy, and so she ends up kind of lying about the extent of her involvement in community organizing and activism. It's very much a love story about friends and family as well as the boyfriend moment, but truly at how the relationship with oneself is what lies at the center of it all. Then we have Clariel by Garth Nix. So this is a prequel to the original series. Specifically follows one of the main antagonists several hundred years, I think, in the future of when those books are set. So very much we're in a medieval guild kind of a situation. I don't know what Garth Nix knows, but he is somehow able to write young women characters so well. Overall, not my fave of the Old Kingdom series I've read thus far, namely the main trilogy, but it was fun to be back in that world and have a little fantasy moment. For general fiction, you know, we might as well just start with Nora Roberts. Okay, we're gonna talk about The Pagan Stone, which is the third in the Sign of Seven trilogy. The previous two, which I talked about in the reading romance video I mentioned at the beginning. So, okay, last book in the trilogy. Wow. I wasn't as excited about this one because it focused on Gage, okay, one of the three boys. I did not enjoy him as much. He was kind of a lot as a character, so I was like, oh great, more of this. But it wasn't as bad as I thought, and then obviously Sybil was an absolute queen. In this book, Nora really said pro-choice. She said some cops are bastards. I was warned by Emma about the absolutely wild plot moments that happen. I'm not gonna get into it because I don't want to spoil it, but wow. Wow. A great thing about this book though is that Nora really understands the importance of women's friendship. I think the reason why Emma and now I love a lot of Nora's writing so much is because of how well she writes about found family, the importance of friendships, even more so than romance. Hello. For some witchy reads, we have the first two books in the Practical Magic series by Alice Hoffman. It was narrated by Christina Moore. Very atmospheric, very character driven, not a lot of plot. but it very much delivers on the vibes, and I was absolutely okay with all of that. But just so you know, that's what the series is like. I really enjoyed the sisters aspect of it and having it written about in such nuance and detail. Gary Hallett, okay, is also the only cop type person I've ever in any way cared about, because he's just like such a mess and like very like tall yet unthreatening somehow. Part of the atmosphere of this book in particular is there definitely is a threatening of danger in a very particularly gendered way, especially with like, it does go into a lot of detail about like domestic abuse as well as like attempts at sexual assault. I'm still really glad that I read it because it did give me like a deeper understanding of the movie and then also the other books in the series as well, obviously. The Rules of Magic was narrated by Maren Ireland. This one follows the aunts in the first one, Franny and Jet, as well as their brother Vincent. I liked this one way better than the first one. Still very like character driven, atmospheric, not a lot of plot, okay? But the vibes were truly immaculate and the pacing was so much better. It was way better balanced. Then we have Haifa Fragments by Khaloud Khamiz. In this book, we follow Maysoon, who is a jewelry designer, and she is a Christian Palestinian who is living within the city. She lives by herself, is very independent. She has a boyfriend who's Muslim, but like doesn't really like need him that much. She's quite active in terms of confronting the realities of the occupation, particularly those living on the other side of occupation and trying to bring people through the border in order to access like medical care and attention. And she starts a relationship with Shad, who is a Palestinian Muslim living across the border. And it gets a little bit queer. Hello. She finds her father's old letters and it really complicates her thinking about the past and her family's role. I really like this one a lot, especially when I got into it. Took me a little bit, partially because I was reading an ebook and also again because it is very character driven, not so much plot driven. Lastly, we have some nonfiction and poetry, and the first one I'm going to talk about is The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Halaldi, and this covers a very expansive history of Palestine based around 6 historical events. The author, from the introduction, discusses how he's from a very prominent Palestinian family, and so he was very close to like key political figures as well as having his own involvement in terms of working with like the UN and other organizations. The author himself reads the introduction and it's very good. But then the narration switches to being narrated by somebody else that you know is not the author but is like reading in first person and also took a very much more kind of like lecture approach. This experience also confirmed for me that I cannot listen to dense nonfiction. Okay, I have to like physically read it. Another nonfiction audiobook that I listened to was Ride the Revolution by Xe Sands. This is an anthology on women in cycling. I picked this one up because I was watching the Tour de France at the time. Cycling is my favorite professional sport. Okay, don't come for me. I've watched the Tour de France every year since 2008. Okay, it is what it is. Although it's a lot in terms of the whiteness, the madness, you know. So I wanted to read something that was like a little bit different. The parts of the book that I liked the best were the historical profiles that covered like women who are important in cycling but are like pretty much almost forgotten. Also the like interviews and like articles written by people who were kind of peripheral to the professional cyclists themselves. There was some interesting insight overall, but I just like wasn't interested in like a good 40% of the book. Lastly, we have Coconut by Nisha Patel. This is a poetry collection. She is the former Edmonton Poet Laureate. She's also previously done work in like policy. I went to the virtual launch of this with New West Press, and that was such a great experience to be able to see her perform and hear her voice and all of that, especially because she is actually primarily a spoken word artist. Highly recommend following her to see more of that. This collection is very much about immigration, being a daughter of immigrant parents in Canada as a settler colonial country, as well as being diasporic in terms of colonialism and queer. It was very, very good. I've talked about my contentious relationship with poetry before, but this is one of the ones I've read that I really appreciated. I thought it was really well written, super engaging. Okay, I forgot that the sun sets at literally 4 now, so sorry for the lighting issues. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye!